let's look at research ethics and data security. First of all, despite this being a quite diverse and multifaceted subject matter, we should be aware of a few basic principles in research ethics that drive or underlie most of the more specific rules and considerations I will go into. Basic ethical principles are voluntarity and informed consent of the participants in any research undertaking. So what we usually want is that participants will contribute to or participate in the research because they want to, or at least can be persuaded to do so, and have explicitly given their consent with the research. That is both when they actively participate in research or if passively research is done on them or anything they have produced or are producing, so observation or content analysis rather than interviewing. That should be supplemented by respectful treatment and responsible handling of data according to announcements and information given. Okay, so this is the participant and respondent side of these principles. On the other hand, an important principle is that research insights that social scientists gather should be justified by the potential social value of their research insights, and these justify any data collection in the first place and any compromises that you have to do in terms of the previous points. They need to be justified by the social value, the foreseeable social value of the research. Of course, then within the research project, scientists are committed to high quality research and ensuring as high quality as they are capable of, validity, integrity, so you don't lie about your data, authenticity, and credibility of what you do and how you present it to the research community and to the public more broadly. And finally, one important principle is also the autonomy of the research community. Not only formal autonomy, but also autonomy in the sense that the research community gets or has available the resources they need to fulfill their social obligations, and that they themselves can determine how these resources are used and how they are distributed. Good. So if we, and you can certainly tell that some of these principles can be in tension with each other. For instance, if I'm committed to maximizing validity, and I am convinced that informing the participants about certain aspects will lead them to non-authentically participating in the study because they want to confirm or disconfirm my hypothesis. Yeah, so that there can be trade-offs, of course, between these principles. The autonomy of the research community might conflict with legislation that seeks to ensure the voluntarity and informed consent principles. So yeah, there is quite a tension between these different components. So in order to exercise these trade-offs a little bit and play through some of these trade-offs, we should look at specific ethical problems. This is all based on the ethics guidelines for social science researchers in Norway, published by a committee made up of social scientists. So this is part of this autonomy that the research community itself will determine its rules and its ethical aspirations. Okay. This collection specifies the freedom and independence of researchers, both the individual freedom and the real independence of researchers, and the principle of institutional self-regulation, which, however, comes also with a responsibility. So good scientific practice needs to be secured within this independence. This includes that, for instance, government departments, funding agencies, and universities need to actively enable and not just independent research and self-regulation of the research community, rather than just passively not violating this independence. Yeah. So you can even go as far as binding academic assessments to ethical rules, stating that researchers must be open about roles and interests in relation to academic assessments. For instance, if I have a PhD candidate, I probably have a financial incentive in securing that this PhD candidate successfully defends his or her thesis, and might push for a committee that is favorable towards the candidate. Supervisors shouldn't misuse their position of power to their advantage in any specific way. And it also defines that both private companies and organizations and public administrations should contribute to research within the scope of their activities and where they need insights. So this is not just limited to explicit research organizations. So we will in practice have to determine who in a legal and in a moral sense is responsible for projects, about the safety and security of everyone involved in the project, for the transparency about funding, roles, and conflicts of interest. And then when it comes to data collection, there's of course ethics involved in case selection, sampling, and field work. For instance, as a main rule, I already talked about it, that researchers are ethically obliged to obtain and maintain consent from the research participants, and it can be withdrawn, the consent, also at any time, preferably in a written form. But what about when people have an impaired capacity to consent, if they can't necessarily safeguard their freedoms, rights, and human dignity themselves? Yeah. I obviously forgot to link the source here, so that will be in the material you can access yourself as an update. Similar case or a specific application of that case is what about research that deals with children. There, obtaining consent from the parents and the children themselves is usually the way to go. And what if it's not practically possible to get consent by the persons participating in research? Or sometimes it might not be the responsible thing to do to get ethical consent. In such a case, such a case is more likely if there's no direct interaction between the researchers and those involved. For instance, if I study social media content, this is more permissible if the information provided isn't sensitive, if participants are not identifiable, and the benefits of the research clearly exceed the possible disadvantage of participating. So obviously, if it's not a very hot issue for the participants that they have participated, particularly if they can't be recognized. Okay, ethical assessments in addition need to consider the public character and context of the statement. It's not like that if something is posted publicly, it is free game for researchers to use and access, but certainly it is part of the trade-off, particularly if there is a clear expectation of publicity. So it's not just a mistake that somebody pushed the wrong button, but obviously they were participating, for instance, in a debate that was to a public article and wanted to engage in a discussion about that. And then we can say they probably have expected that this is a public statement. Of course, we need to consider if those involved are in any way vulnerable, which is the risk for which increases a lot as soon as you can identify these people. For instance, if you quote them word by word, it's easy to look up which actual public statement it was and by whom it was, and then the person is de-anonymized. Okay. So not obtaining consent and not revealing the purpose of a study may be justified if research seeks to uncover abuse of power or even criminal behavior. If you ask for consent, basically you give a warning that allows that person to cover up the abuse of power or the criminal behavior, then you are certainly exempted from obtaining consent. And if severe security risks for the researchers would result in the process of obtaining consent. Okay, so it doesn't end there at the recruiting stage, but also during the data management and data analysis process, anonymity, confidentiality need to be maintained. The researchers have a duty to notify when the participants are endangering themselves or others. So if you discover that somebody's doing something dangerous, you have the obligation to notify them. And when you store and share research materials, that needs to be in a responsible way that, for instance, doesn't make it easy for others to access or steal these data and use them for whatever ends they want. Okay, the ethics of publication. Also, what happens with the data, but also other aspects of publication. On the one hand, academics have a responsibility to publish. As soon as something becomes scientifically relevant for the research community, scientific publication is important. Because it ensures the quality of the research. It's assessed by your colleagues. Publication is a fundamental norm because knowledge that's not published can't enter the scientific consensus in the same way and cannot contribute to building our knowledge. So if you don't publish your results, that is a problem, not in each and every single case, but collectively, if lots of people didn't publish their results, that would be very detrimental to scientific progress. Okay. Scientists should be open about their processes, should be accountable for their research, and be welcoming rather than rejecting critique. Research materials and results should be made available to others as openly as possible. Of course, there's a tension with anonymity, confidentiality, and so on. You, of course, for instance, have to anonymize your data before sharing them with the research community. But this open publication of lots of materials facilitates learning, accountability, and critique, which are all of fundamental value to the scientific process. The process of falsification, for instance, showing that no, actually what the conclusions drawn by these researchers were false, their data show something else. That is very valuable for the scientific practice, and while on the surface it might be a very awkward moment for those who get kind of falsified, it is an essential part of the scientific process to be critical and ask questions and try to answer questions and make the best possible choices and conclusions. Draw the best possible conclusions. Okay, you, of course, as a publishing author, need to secure good citation practice. Their practices change, but the research community more or less determines what it wants to view as good citation practice. You need to avoid plagiarism, also self-plagiarism. You, of course, need to be credible and authentic and trustworthy, so you don't fabricate your research results. Your research results are authentic. You don't distort or conceal anything you have found to be meaningful. So distorting or concealing relevant interpretations or analysis isn't good scientific practice, even if it probably doesn't lead to the conclusions you prefer. That's just the way it is. You need to give the data and the plausible interpretations the space they deserve. Recognizing co-authorship, so who's an author, who has contributed to the research in which ways, and how should that be expressed, is something that the collaborators in a research project need to talk about. That's a bit like when you do a group work and you have to settle on who did contribute how much to the group work and gets credit for which parts of the project report. That's a bit similar question. So also if there's a collective of 5 researchers, they did different things that contributed to the paper, and that should be recognized and expressed in some way, and if it's just the sequence of authors and how they are listed on a paper. Researchers should, however, also look beyond the disciplinary boundaries of their specific discipline. They are encouraged to participate in interdisciplinary dialogue wherever it makes sense, where other disciplines are involved or have relevant connections. And publication also involves the publishers. The publishers should also be committed to upholding the research ethics, for instance, by requiring submitting statements that consent was given by the research subjects, or certain open research practices that should be secured, and so on. That ethics evaluations are required by ethics boards or something. But even if you go interdisciplinary, that doesn't mean that you already address the broader public. Here, researchers also have a social responsibility to disseminate their research beyond the scientific community, and research institutions should facilitate that, for instance, by providing PR personnel or outlets that publish research that is relevant to the public. But of course, this is kind of selective. It's not that everything needs to be communicated to the public. Some things are just very discipline-centered or address only very specific and research internal mechanics. But some research, and the research we are doing, social research, is probably most prone to that, might benefit from sharing these insights with as large audiences as possible. Therefore, researchers should also participate in public debates and bring expertises, scientific results, methods, and attitudes into the public discourse. In Norway, we have a specific agency called SIKT, the Norwegian Agency for Shared Services in Education and Research, that controls the data management process. So that is particularly securing that the information you collect in terms of data is handled in accordance with guidelines as defined in the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation at the EU level. And this is a specific form that these ethical principles I talked about take regarding the management of data. So SIKT is responsible for data management and sharing, for instance, of larger studies like the European Social Survey. They provide infrastructure and services to enhance education and research experiences like data protection services and data sharing for open research. But researchers can also use general international outlets where they can publish their data or make accessible their data and materials. But SIKT can also assist researchers with data gathering, data analysis, and methodological issues, so they can provide some guidance with specialization on data privacy and research ethics. And also SIKT is involved in some international initiatives for data archives. So if you're looking for data that have already been collected, you should pay their archives a visit. Practically, however, the most important thing for you will be to file an application to SIKT that registers your data collection and checks that your data management aligns with the GDPR. And if you want to know what the GDPR really says and prescribes for researchers, then I encourage you to click this link. This is a relatively plain and understandable formulation of what the GDPR requires and probably also does not require. Because, as I said, it's not the only principle to protect the participants. Researchers also have obligations that in some cases some compromises regarding the informed consent, for instance, can be justified, but with strict limits. Okay, I don't have to go through all these parts. These are screenshots of a project registration I did in SIKT for conducting qualitative interviews. So this is more or less a guide on how to enter or what information to enter there in order to make SIKT process this as a qualitative interview study in a way that is relatively likely to be processed in a streamlined way. So, of course, if your practical research project looks very differently, then you have to fill it out in a different way. But this is very much the standard version of what a non-sensitive qualitative interview study would look like and which kinds of fields you would click and what kinds of information you would provide, and making it relatively easy to get a green light from SIKT, because also this study really then isn't very sensitive and fulfills basically all the requirements that we have. The same you could do for a quantitative survey you are fielding in SIKT. However, you are registering in SIKT. However, quite often this is as long as your participants are completely anonymous in your study, so you can't track their IP addresses or whatever, or have some other key to bind units in your data sets with their responses, you don't have to register that data collection in SIKT in this way. Then we have participant observation in SIKT, which can be a bit more sensitive. So there you also have to file quite some information. And in quantitative content analysis, there is also you might also be able to say that there are no person-sensitive data, but as soon as you code information about certain persons, it can become necessary to file for this in SIKT, and that is then a much greater hassle, because then we have problems with informed consent. So if we don't have direct contact with these people but only code content by them or about them, it's really hard and probably also infringing on those persons to try to collect informed consent. Okay.